Hey guys, we just had the European Championship, which was the first Premier level event post Power of the Elements, and while I don't typically do top cut breakdowns of the most common hand traps and staples multiple times in the same month, I felt this was needed since the format is changing rapidly. Now before I begin, a big thanks to my sponsors as always, and some of you have been using that discount code for custom playmat and sleeves at your playmat, so keep that up. Now since Euros had almost a whopping 3,000 players, Top Cut was 128 players, which is nuts. Now of course not every deck list was available, but a huge thanks to Lundrady and Christian for compiling the available deck list in dueling book list form, which I used for this video. Basically, I had 32 of the 128 lists to work with, and so this was the breakdown among the lists that were available, so obviously not fully representative of the actual top 128. Now, most were Spright variants, with one being Teralaments Spright, so I just put that here, and followed by quote-unquote regular Teralaments, with most using the Danger Engine. There continues to be some Mathmech tops as well, which if you saw my recent tier list by the data video, they were actually scored as tier 1. We then have some Rikka, which actually won the entire event and has really surprised many people with its dominance. Then we have some more anti-meta strategies in Thunder, but even an older classic in Altergeist. As for an overview of the hand trap numbers, in the main this has actually decreased to a median of 7 compared to 11 based on topping regional lists from just a couple of weeks ago. As one example, Joshua Schmidt, who came top 8 with Spright, actually didn't play any hand traps at all and opted for more power spells instead, so perhaps some Spright players are heading towards that way rather than playing something like 15 hand traps. In the side, the median was 2.5 hand traps, slightly down from 2 weeks ago as well. As for going second board breakers, the median was 4.5 cards, which was higher than 3 based on topping regional lists from a couple weeks ago, and this number is higher than usual as well. Predominantly, this seems to be coming from many lists main decking Super Poly now, which is primarily driven by Teralaments lists. In the side, the median number was 7, which is slightly lower than what it was a couple weeks ago as well. As usual, let's cover the top 10 most played hand traps among these topping lists that were available. And number 1 is not Ash, but Infinite Impermanence. This is pretty interesting because Imperm has become quite good this format, as Spright players tend to prioritize getting red out to put a monster negate out, but Imperm of course is a trap. It also plays around Talents, which has been popular lately thanks to Spright. Next is Ash Blossom, which actually a good amount of decks are not running, despite being the second most popular overall. Perhaps it's not seen as too impactful this format. Against tiers there would be too much to Ash, and you could say the same for Spright, although Ash on the starter is sorta nice depending on the hand, but does leave you vulnerable to Gamma. Let's see if it reclaims that top spot in the next big event. At third is Nibiru, which has been climbing up in the ranks lately, despite players saying initially that this card is going to be bad this format because of Spright. On the contrary, this card is actually quite impactful against Spright if you have another hand trap, and a lot of players are disrespecting Nib, especially for game 1, so we definitely still need to play around this. At fourth is DD Crow, which might be losing a bit in popularity compared to before, but still solid against a lot of decks, particularly Teralaments, to try to prevent their fusion summons. It's nice that it's not once per turn, so drawing multiples can still work, although it's unfortunate that this card won't do anything against Flunder, which is a bad matchup for Spright and tiers. At 5th is Gamma, which has been a popular choice, as Gammaing the normal summon effect like Beaver, Diva, and Sprites can potentially end things right there, because they really need those level 2 bodies on board to go off. The Brick-in driver is really unfortunate, but goes to show you how powerful it is for people to run Gamma regardless. Then we have Effect Failure, which aside from negating monster effects, it is a tuner, so you can bring it out with Hulk and then bounce it back with Swap Frog and Sprites if they're running the Diva build. As mentioned earlier, to play around Talents or Spright Red, Imperm is ideal, but Failure does have its unique pros as well. Tied for 6th was Ogre, which has been getting resurgence lately because of Ogreing the Gigantic Spright is pretty strong, and not to mention, it's always been good against popping that Flunder field spell. Brave Token stuff is still going on as well in combination with Spright, which is where it originally got its rise in popularity. Next we have Dimension Shifter, which up until recently was mainly seen in Flunder. Now we have some Spright lists running this in the side so that they can combat against tiers, and while Exorcisters were not a part of this video, they're another potential meta contender that will main deck Shifter. Essentially turns out plays for most decks. If you can run it, it's probably the strongest hand trap there is. Then we have Artifact Lancia, which hasn't been seen play in a while. Something of notice is that Spright lists were running Artifact Sanctum in the side for Scythe, but would just run one Lancia in the side as well, which gives them options to bring on either card depending on the matchup. Lastly, we have Ghost Spell, which has not been too popular lately, as this usually ends up getting chain blocked. Some Spright lists use it as an alternative to prevent their normal summon effects from getting gammaed, and Teralaments may run it to prevent their monsters from being DD crowed, as that's probably happening a lot right now. On to the most common side deck staples, we are starting off with Dark Rule No More yet again at number 1. The crazy part is that 23 of the 26 that ran this card main decked it, which really tells you something about the format when you're main decking a going second card while you're playing a going first deck. It's not necessarily an auto win if you have this card, but definitely gets you closer to it. Some think that Konami will pull its classic move of limiting this card to promote sales of Ultimate Slayer and Forbidden Droplets, but hopefully that won't be the case. Next we have Harpy's Feather Duster, a common staple for back row removal with no restrictions, predominantly a side deck card, and Spright does lose Heart to Floodgates, so this is going to be a must in the list. Speaking of back row removal, we then have Red Reboot. Even though Spright can't necessarily OTK reliably, at least depending on the build, they can easily make Zeus, so being able to Red Reboot and then clear the field with Zeus isn't that bad, even at the cost of half your life points. Definitely a card that's been in the hot seat for a ban, and it may very well happen. Then we have Call by the Grave, which we usually see at a higher, mostly a main deck card, really great for stopping hand traps, but now also stopping Teralaments fusion summons, and whatever else, the card is so versatile. It's another card that's being debated of just being banned because it is Saki at 1, so curious to see what happens to this card. At number 5 we have Triple Tactics Talents, which has become very popular in Spright lists. If you have this after you get Gamma, you can just take their Gamma since it's a level 2 and just combo off from there. Really strong card and mostly main decked if played, but can also just be an utter brick. Then we have Super Polymerization, which was all main decked if played. Now predominantly this is being driven by Teralaments as they are fusion heavy, but some Spright lists were running this as well. With the release of Garura and the Power of the Elements, Super Poly got a lot easier, although it would have been great if it was Wind so that we can play around Wind Barrier Statue. Next we have a card that we haven't seen in a while, which is Dino Wrestler Pankratops. Very versatile and can pop back row or monsters, and its 2600 attack is quite beefy and proves to be useful against Spright as it can force out that elf effect before going into battle phase, at least if they don't have Dupe Frog on board. Then we have Lightning Storm, just another board wipe removal card. Not too much to say about this one, although it was only sided in the list that played this card. A very powerful card that is hard to stop is Dimensional Barrier, which was not played as much as before when Branded Despia was the hot popular new strategy. Still strong against Teralaments and Spright, as well as Swordsoul of course. Absolutely dead against Flunder though, but a very good card to have in today's format. Next we have Evenly Matched, a really strong board wipe removal which can take care of both monsters and back row. When paired with Dark Ruler, this really is the best board breaking card out there at the cost of your battle phase. Similar to Dark Ruler, we have Forbidden Droplet, which is not as popular as before because the Scythe Lock on your draw or standby phase isn't really happening much anymore. Still a strong card to have along with Dark Ruler for additional monster negates, and can at least be more flexible for going first or second. Then we have a Pointer of the Red Lotus, which is primarily driven by the large number of Spright lists included for this video. Very strong and can just snipe out that Dark Ruler you had that you thought was going to be the key in clearing the board. Some lists are also playing Trap Trick so that they can tutor this out with either a Pointer, Dimensional Barrier, or Artifact Sanctum. Speaking of Artifact Sanctum, this was also played in several lists, particularly in the side deck of Spright lists. Interesting to see that many players are going this route along with a Pointer or by itself, whereas up until recently Solemn Judgment seemed to be the more popular as the other going first card outside of a Pointer. Locking your opponent out of the extra deck is of course huge, so even if you got Dark Ruler, they probably won't be able to do much either, and you can just clap back for the win. Then we have a card that so many players are clamoring for it to get banned, and that is Mystic Mine. Not played in as many lists as I thought it would, at least among those that were publicly available, but regardless, it's an auto-win card in most instances and it's painful to have to watch or play through Mystic Mine gameplay. Let's just hope that this card finally gets put to rest soon. Lastly, we have a card that I've never seen in these top ranking lists, and that is Galaxy Cyclone. It's pretty interesting as on its own it can provide multiple pops over the course of 2 turns, and at least in that be caught Mystic Mine scenario, this card could be handy. Twin Twisters was also seen in 8 lists as well. Alright guys, so that was it for the European Championship Top Cut breakdown. Hope that was helpful in preparing your hand trap and side deck lineup. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bearlord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are great. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, links down below. Take care guys.